All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining the session. This is the fourth in our webinar series. And my guess is after looking at the number of attendees who have joined, there are about 85 people who registered for this. So that's great. Thank you for the interest. Many of you would have attended some of the previous three webinars that we hosted. So, and many of you are friends of Center of Gravity, so you'll be familiar with what you do. But I'm going to ask a couple of minutes indulgence so that for those who came in late, we just tell a little bit of a context setting of what Center of Gravity is all about. I promise not a sales spiel. We'll get over with this very quickly and then jump into the meat of the discussion. All right. So very quickly,
Navin?
yes. Can you guys hear me?
Hello.
Hello. Can you hear me, Dilip?
Yeah.
Sorry, somebody had a question?
Did somebody tell anything?
I thought Dilip had a question.
No.
No, continue.
Yeah. Sorry. So very quickly, Center of Gravity, as you've met all the partners here. My name is Navin Narayanan. I'm one of the partners at Center of Gravity, as is Rajesh, Dilip, and Vijay, whom you might have witnessed chatting amongst ourselves a while back. And what we are is a business strategy consulting firm. And the way in which we have done our work, what we call is the philosophy and the method by which we do it, we call it human-centeredness. And the broad thought is that belief that all problems faced by businesses or organizations are fundamentally human problems. You deal with human beings who have their life stories, their own motivations, their anxieties, their fears, whether they are management of a company, whether they are employees, whether they are partners, whether they are customers. They have a human vector to which how they make decisions in their lives. And to understand the inherent humanity in a business and to understand the humanity of the lives of their customers and to bring these two worlds together, to connect in a nutshell, to connect the the right set of customers to the organization that was born to serve them because that is inherently their humanity, their culture, and their competence. That's the crux of the story. And there is a methodology and a process by which we have done this over the years, and it has yielded great success and a roster of clients that have, awarded us with repeated projects and challenged us to in and burnished our own ideas of what human-centeredness means and how it brings success to the world of business and to the world at large. And this is the story of Center of Gravity. And for those who are interested in other stuff, I'm sure there's a website and stuff that people can go check it out. I won't dwell more than that. But in this month, especially during the time when all of us are at home, we've always thought about that this idea of human-centeredness and the magic of it that we have experienced, we wanted to share that in some sense with the world at large. We do this kind of discussions. We have done it in colleges and we do it in corporate forums, and sometimes we train some of our clients' marketing teams, etc. But this is the first step in a formal way of actually having these conversations, discussions that hopefully takes some of our thoughts that we've been debating and crystallizing for years to a different audience, and from your questions also burnish the thoughts ourselves and put it to the test, etc. That's the idea of this brand that we are trying to create, which is World More Human, which is a series of conversations, a webinar being one part of it. And today is the fourth in that series. For those who have missed some of the previous conversations, there is a website. On our website, there is a link on webinars. The recordings are there. You can watch this. And somebody asked whether this will be available. Yes, it will be put up in a day or two onto the website. So that's on the mechanisms of what COG is all about, what World More Human is all about. All right. So now today's conversation is obviously, it's a little bit of a provocative title. One, I'm forecasting depth of something, but I think the title is there by intent, which is More than the death of broadcast, I'm really saying that there is a trajectory towards the rise of communities, and therefore, perhaps in a more euphemistic way, the diminishing power of broadcast. When I say broadcast, it's the philosophy of broadcasting, and the rise of communities is the thought paradigm of crafting and creating communities for brands and why that is important to do. And that's the discussion we want to have today. So yeah, our own journey into running communities primarily comes from a lot of the community creation and conversational work we have done as part of our project. So many of the projects we have executed, especially in the last 5 years, would have had some mechanism of conversation spaces that existed for a period of time, either as Facebook groups or WhatsApp groups or participation in forums that crystallized what it means to create a community, and in some cases, communities that we created and managed on behalf of brands, especially some of the brands we know for a consistent period of time, primarily focused on deriving insight that will help brands do better. But this conversation is about the idea of community thinking at large, not specifically the kinds of community center of gravity has run. But a lot of our thinking has been fructified by the philosophy of human-centeredness, how we have seen it being practiced here, and our own experiences of being in the community space for the last, I would say, about 7 years, right? So great, let's get into the real crux of the discussion. And the first concept, I want to take us back. Human beings have been on this planet for 100,000 years. And this is the idea of the bazaar. And in a marketplace, and if you're in the Western hemisphere, think of a farmer's market, where the person who creates the product or the produce in this case, as the image will say, whatever they have created, they actually are selling their product or introducing it to the people who will buy their products. How does value then get created? Value used to get created in the conversations, in the back and forth. The people who made it will have to tell you the way they made it, who they were, what their philosophy of making it was, why this is better than the choices that are available elsewhere, or in cases if they were really caring about their customers, in many cases they tell you, don't buy today's lot because tomorrow's is going to be better. I'll do something better for you, because they were establishing relationships through this conversation. Similarly, the people who are buying the stuff would have this conversations where value is actually derived for both parties by the kind of interactions they had. If you go to a place where, in marketplaces where you know that you're going to bargain for value, you're going to interact with the merchant or the trader in this case, who really knows his merchandise. I would wager that if there is a customer who comes and, like me, he's an ignoramus in the skill of bargaining, and I would basically pay whatever price is asked and take the merchandise and go away, I would wager that that merchant or that producer is going to treat me as a certain kind of customer. His connection will be far higher with somebody who actually engages in banter, because my act of just buying and going has actually deprived him of the dopamine that comes from human conversation. They actually like their consumers who bargain, not just as a sport in which they win or lose, but there is something in that inherent nature of that conversation that builds a relationships that is actually win-win for both parties. And this is the way human beings have interacted in the marketplace for eons. And that was the natural state of affairs, all of which that used to exist for hundreds of thousands of years, since the barter system to the advent of money to the modern world, for a big part of time, right? And in a nutshell, the people who make stuff were directly having bi-directional conversation with people who buy stuff. And this is the state of affairs that existed for quite some time. So what changed? What changed? And sorry, before I get into what changed, I think one book I definitely want to recommend. If you have read it, then congratulations. I recommend read it again, because every time I have read it, I have discovered new things that provoke conversations in the people. It evokes thoughts in our heads also. And one of the seminal work that thought that exists in the Clutrain Manifesto, which is a book about the advent of the internet and how it is fundamentally going to change the world of business at large. And one of the things they said was markets are conversations, because it harkens back to the age of the bazaar. And that's what we as human beings were designed to do. Evolutionarily, that's how we have interacted, and that's how, in many ways, we have become a dominant species on the planet also. So if markets are conversations, what changed is really the Industrial Revolution. And the change that it built is that it widened the distance between people who made stuff and people who bought and consumed the stuff. You could make something in large quantities systematically and distributed over a wide area. So it became difficult for the producers and the consumers to actually interact. You had a lot more intermediaries, and you had more standardized ways of buying. So the conversation in the marketplace actually diminished. And what it got replaced with is what Seth Godin calls the marketing industrial complex, right? There is this big mass of broadcast communication there, where the people who made stuff still wanted to tell the people who bought the stuff, look, this is why you should buy my things. But you are broadcasting these messages, and the hero of this became mass media advertising. Of course, it evolved from newspapers to radio to television to cable, and now in the advent of the internet, there is still a significant amount of advertising that interrupts you in what you are doing and tries to tell you, hey, this is something that you should buy, and this is something that makes sense for you. And there is a big ecosystem that came to deliver that to you, right? The other thing, which was the feedback that used to come from the consumer to the producer, became the domain of market research. Now, fundamentally, in this bi-directional mechanism, the power has shifted to the people who make stuff. They are the ones who are broadcasting. They are ones who trigger the feedback mechanism from the consumers also. And this world was hunky-dory, and people knew how to operate in this. And I would wager that human beings learned to operate in this new sandbox paradigm that happened, because that the means of communication, etc., have gotten distorted. The communication may have become subterranean, but it is definitely not there at the surface. And what the Clutrain Manifesto, one of its central tenets, it said was that if markets are conversations, the internet was supposed to restore that balance of power to the people, and change that relationship between brands and people. And one of the ways it allows it to do it is this, that people can now form tribes around things that they are interested in. And you only need two things to turn a group of people into a tribe. One is you must have a shared interest. That shared interest can be a passion for something. It can be a liking of an individual and their philosophy. It can be adherence to a brand's core purpose and values that it embodies. And if you have a shared interest, and the other thing is you have a way to communicate. If there is a means of communication, whether it's a WhatsApp group, a Facebook group, a Instagram feed, and people can actually converse between each other, people will form tribes. People will sense identities that come from belonging to communities like this. And I'm just going to digress a little bit and tell the story of where I live and a community where I saw this power really come to fore. This is way before I even understood human-centeredness, but it is a powerful narrative in and of itself. Now, this is where I live. This is the city of Bangalore. And for people who live in Bangalore, Bangalore pretty much is, if you think you live in Bangalore, I assume you're supposed to live within this golden circle out here. And I live way out here. I think 500 meters beyond this road, Bangalore actually ends. And so we have been the butt of jokes by many of our friends in Bangalore who say that, you need a passport and a visa to actually travel to the city of Bangalore. But the point I'm making is we moved here 9 years back. And it's a beautiful place, and a small plug for Yelahanka. That's the view from my apartment. So obviously, if you're living far away from the city, you have a different landscape. But that also means that from modern amenities that you expect the city to give you, which is the advent of a mall, or my inherent desire after we came back from the US that there should be a Starbucks. This kind of things didn't exist. And as a person, and seeking this out. When is the mall going to open? What store has opened in the mall? What amenities are now available in Yelahanka as it keeps developing, which is where I live? How do I get to know that? You got to know that in my apartment complex by a mechanism which is the women inside the complex were in solidarity with each other, and they were facing the brunt of living in the distance, and they wanted modern living. So they self-organized as a WhatsApp group and helped each other out. Today, if you live in my apartment complex, and if your apartment by some member of your home is disconnected from this group, you're going to have a suboptimal life. Nobody sat in a room and figured out this is the strategy, this is how you're going to create something, etc. There was an inherent shared purpose. Life needs to get better for all of us. They came together, they formed a group, and it is of supreme power. Things happen in this complex if you are part of the space, and if you are dissed in this space, things may not happen the way you intended to be. And coincidentally, as part of a project, 7 years back, I was in Gurgaon for a project on digital for Asian Paints, and we were conversing with customers, and repeatedly in conversations in Gurgaon, because at that point in time, it would have been going through the same trajectory of being a suburb to an elitist town. The people who were of similar life stages and similar socioeconomic classes had formed essentially a moms group where everything about life, all the help they wanted, they would help each other. And this is a network that is now clearly nearly 35,000 people in size and growing. If you don't have a currency in this group in Gurgaon as a brand to succeed, life will be difficult for you. And this transcends to all kinds of communities. So Rajnikant's fan clubs follow the same philosophy. Rajnikant has very little to do with this, but they have created their own groups, and they live a certain lifestyle, and they advocate a certain ways of behavior. This is the same tribe creation you will see in communities that have come together, identified a common purpose, and these tribes are thriving. You can see that in tribes that you may hate their guts. This is the cheapest election that has ever been won in human history. Cheapest election won in human history has been won by tribe creation. It has stood up against the might of everything broadcast because these people had an identity. Now, we may not particularly like that, but one of their core purposes, shared purpose, is potentially a common enemy. They hate the elitist world that has dissed them over years, and they came together, and the feeling they have is solidarity with each other. Their life is better because they are standing next to each other and they are in this fight together. That sense of oneness, a sense of community feeling, is what human beings have managed to accomplish when they can interconnect and communicate with each other. This is really what has made human beings the most successful species on the planet. As we've read Sapiens, they tell us the fact that we can come together beyond the idea of blood relationships and all these connections. Here, animal kingdoms, the groups don't go beyond 100. Human beings go into hundreds of thousands because we can come together on the power of an idea. And if a tribe knows a way of communicating and interacting with each other, the tribe can be infinitely large. It's about 40% of US population if you look at Make America Great Again as a tribe. The question we always had is that, okay, if tribe formation, if bidirectional communication, if this is encoded into human DNA for hundreds of thousands of years, and if brands, really the good brands, are seen by us as human beings, they have a philosophy, a set of values, and we have a deep connection to brands, which is really what advertising has done, or communication has done, to infuse brands with meaning, so that our brand choices also define us, and there is power in that. How come when we think of brands that have formed communities, we go back to the same old examples? We talk about Harley Davidson or Lego, or there are some categories like, blockchain where everybody builds community. But I had to really struggle to put this chart together. I'm sure there are communities outside of this that I have missed, but that's not the point. But in the grand spectrum of global brands that exist, there are only a few that have formed communities. Everybody else is sitting outside of this space. And the question is, why is that? And who then is building communities? And it is a whole host of newcomers who actually cannot operate in this space. new businesses and brands who don't have the money to play the mass media game, because it takes money to play in that space, naturally focus on the left-hand side of the bell curve. They look at the early customers, and this can be as small as a homemaker who suddenly started cooking and she's nurturing her first set of customers on WhatsApp and asking for feedback. It can be a business like Paperboard that aggregates its first set of customers by consistently looking at feedback and then adapting to what they want. But they all go through the same process. They focus on their loyalists. They build a sense of tribeness within both of them. They identify what that shared purpose is, what the brand's point of view is, what its philosophy is, and who are the customers that resonate with it. They nurture that audience and they keep widening that shared space over time, right? And that's how these brands grow. The established brands have not done it because the paradigm is very different the way it is. And I just take one example of a brand that we have done it because I'll use that. This is a brand called Stories by Joseph Roddick. This is a luxury brand out of India. They are photographers. They are wedding photographers, and they do luxury weddings. So when I'm saying luxury weddings, think of Virat Kohli and Anushka Sharma, Priyanka Chopra and Nick Jonas, and so on and so forth, right? They do palaces. The wedding photographer cost fee may be as high as many people's weddings. And these are two guys, Joseph Roddick and his brother Joshua. They both were your typical engineer MBAs, the guys who went to IIM and then they got good jobs and they worked in multinational companies. And they did that for a while and then they quit their jobs and started this photography business focused on wedding photography. Now, clearly you can look at the photographs. They are very talented photographers. They are one of the best in the world when they at this job. But I'm sure there are equally hundreds and hundreds of photographers across the world that will take great photographs. What makes these guys so desired that they have every year about 2,000 inquiries and they take 30 projects. Most of their customers they turn away, and still people keep coming back to them. So when we had this interview with them, this is what they said. Look, I have now about, let's say, 240,000 followers. I think the sum total of the various photographers they have, I think they're roughly close to 500,000 base of people who follow them on Instagram. Instagram, naturally, because they are photographers, where else to exhibit your work rather than the world of Instagram? And there are millions of other photographers on Instagram. What they have done is this entire tribe of people have been painstakingly built over years of conversation that these guys have. With every one of their stimulus that they put out there, they are fostering conversation. It doesn't matter whether you're a 10-year-old, you're a 15-year-old, there is no index to saying, I only want these guys. I only want the guys who can afford me, therefore I should micro-target. None of that. They built a tribe of desire. So today there may be 10-year-olds who don't know what they are going to do in life, etc. But they know that their wedding photography, they want Joseph Roddick to take. And they've built that tribe like that. And that's why they command the price and the cachet that they have. And what they have managed to do, of course, in their category is to actually alter the purchase process entirely. You used to think that when you are a trigger, then you'll go through all these stages of the purchase process and then you will choose a brand and then you'll buy. They say no. In today's day and age, if you can harness a tribe and you can keep them engaged, there are people who are excited by your brand, especially in your community. They'll be an endless stage of predisposition. They've already made the brand choice way before they enter the category. When they enter the category, they're just going to buy it. That's it. And you're going to focus on tribe creation because it's compound interest. You're going to keep building this until that can happen. And this can happen across categories. It's not just luxury categories that can do this. So there are various people, those who may not have the pedigree of a Joseph Roddick, and Audi Venkatesh is one. He's a chartered accountant who got into mobile phone photography, and his entire feed is about teaching people how to take photographs on your mobile phone. And he's seen as a certain brand. Individuals have done it. So I'm going to skip over this. There are various, and if you reflect on it, I'm sure you can come up with small brands that do this just because they cannot afford advertising money. They almost taken it as the last resort, but it should actually be the first thing you plan to do if you're a brand, right? I'm going to skip over some of these brands, but the idea is they've actually looked at their relationship with their customers not as a transactional one. They've actually made it a social relationship. they have built friendships with their consumers. And a true friend and friendships, I use that word very consciously. It's not just love. They are comfortable talking about their failings, their misgivings, where they're being vulnerable, where they have not done it well. All of that is conversation that builds tribe thinking. It's not just, just show a nice facade while you hide all your weaknesses in the back end. That could have worked in the paradigm of the mass media industrial complex, where the producers and the consumers are so far apart. The only thing that you thought was brand building is this nice facade you show to them in the context of your commercial. That doesn't work anymore. The people that are interested in your brand, in your category, want to know everything. They want to know the minute details. They are engaged in that conversation. If the brands don't create a tribe that will continuously engage in that conversation, you're leaving money on the table. That's what you discover. And the little guys like Joseph Roddick, etc., are cleaning house by doing this, right? So we went back to it, and now the Clue Train Manifesto came out like 2 decades ago, I think. Yeah, I think it was almost 20 years to it. And still, this ecosystem is still existing by and large. In fact, even the internet has been turned into a space for mass media display advertising. We talk, marketing spaces are consumed with language like programmatic buying and how can we get influencer marketing, and how can we interrupt people better to show them something so that they can go to buy, versus saying how do we create a tribe and nurture it and foster it so that I create a brand asset of such magnitude that nobody can touch me, right? That narrative doesn't happen because the power of that industrial complex is still fairly strong. And I posed the same question. Rajesh and I were in a conversation with one of the people who had created these brands, who had experience of being on the other side, on the marketing side, before he created a community brand. And he said, when I sat on that other side, what I had was a massive budget. I had 100 crores to spend. And the easiest thing for me to do, if I knew what I had to do for my marketing, is I called a couple of agencies. I briefed them on what I need to do. I put money behind it and finished. It's done, right? I don't have to do all this hard work of nurturing, creating, etc. My job is over. Now that I am this side, I know the power of painstakingly building my audience over time and consistently doing that. And no amount of marketing can do this. But when I'm on the other side of the fence, it's what he now coined as this is lazy marketing. That marketing has probably suborned its power to something else that it needs to reclaim, which is the narrative of its brand, its purpose. We talk a lot about brands having purpose, but after you have derived your purpose, if all you do is communicate your purpose again and not live it in every touch point, especially to form tribes, then that purpose is going to come out as hollow, because you're not going to be living the brand. And community formation allows you to live and breathe the brand and form tribes that really pay in market success. And you can think of brands that were created on the basis of communities, a OnePlus, a Xiaomi. They kick the butt out of brands like Samsung, etc. and spend billions of dollars in community, in advertising and communication. But it can't stand the strength of a tribe that stands up for you and goes to bat for you. And for that, brands need to invest, and it will take effort. Change will probably be ushered by all the newcomers who come, right? And they will do it because they can't work in that other paradigm. They don't have the money to spend, but they're actually building muscle. So the paradigm, we always tell large brands that you need to go here, because the new competition is not going to be another shark like you. It's like you're going to die a death of 1,000 cuts by piranhas. Think of all the Instagram brands or the local brands that you yourself would have jumped into and bought and tried. When you chose them, you walked away from some mainstream brand that would have pumped tons and tons of money into communication. When I say communication and advertising, I'm saying broadcast methodology of communication. This is not to say that advertising doesn't do any is of no use. Advertising creates the personality of the brand. It gives me a context in which to hold the brand in my head. But it has to be lived up to its tribe in all the actions that the brand does. And when you communicate those actions, or when you show that to your tribe, it's almost like in Star Trek metaphor, it's like a Borg. You can't fight the Borg. That resistance is futile, because how do you fight a beast like this where everything works in sync? to build, brand connect of a nature that just the old paradigm can no longer serve. And this is the philosophical understanding. It obviously appeals to us because it leans into what is, I guess I would call it fundamental human behavior. This is what we were meant to do, to create our tribes. I mean, this little conversation that we are having in some shape or form, I hope will nurture our tribe, right? Including what you like, what you hate, what we talked about. Hopefully there is a human connection that happens between center of gravity and its audience. And in some shape or form, a tribe creation happens. And, that's the best way of building brands which are ultimately fundamentally human entities. They have meanings to us. They have far more meaning than can single-handedly be carried by the world of broadcast anymore. I mean, I think that's like, if it's a bump, somebody can write a better bumper sticker than that. But, that's the thought I want to leave you with. And one final thought in this is, maybe market is going through a permanent structural shift. I mean, we've been having this conversation for years now. Why doesn't this happen? Maybe we are at that point where you find that the old ways of marketing can't stand up to what's happening right now, because you're seeing the hollowness of what has been put out as manufactured messaging. Everybody can see through that. Everybody knows that a manufactured marketing message has an angle to it. You're trying to get a sale. You're trying to, influence me in some way that may be of less value to myself. But if it was a community that was created, I think brands who created a community, whether that is Cult Fit or any one of the other brands, will have a far better time even in these tough times than some of the other brands that would have entirely relied only on the broadcast methodology to try and build brands and differentiate themselves. Now that's it from the talk. I think I want to leave some time for questions that can come up and take some time to answer those. We ourselves have a small community that we try to nurture, and there is a group and a purpose that I put out there, and it'll be part of the recording. I'm not going to recruit you to it, but if you feel like somewhere what we are talking about connects to you, that you would want to stay connected to this conversation, please go ahead, click the group, find a group on Facebook and connect with us. I hope to see you on the other side in the Q&A session. Rajesh, I'm going to stop the share. And, I guess you're going to take the questions on behalf of the group. How's this going to work?
Yeah, I think all of you can post your questions on the Q&A window, or you can raise your hands and I'll unmute you. But Navin, as people kind of post their questions, I have a question, which is that it's nice to know that a community is critical to be created in today's times, especially. But what is the process by which this happens? Now, you look at Audi Venkatesh or Joseph Roddick, and you see this 2.5 million followers, and there are threads of conversations that happen. How does it start off, and what is the process by which it eventually gets done over a period of time, which is a more complicated thing because clients already sit on social media platforms like Instagram and Facebook with a few thousands or maybe a few million followers. What do you do? I mean, what is the method by which that happens?
I think thanks for pointing that out. I wanted to say that right at the outset, I wanted to say today's conversation is focused around why we should have communities and not how to do it. But that being said, I'll at least, from our experience of having done it, because we can't profess to say that the way we have built communities is the only way to build it. But I think the first and foremost is to understand that creating a community is a sense of belongingness. That's what you're creating. You're creating a sense of oneness with your intended tribe. And you must have a proxy for who that tribe is to you. And I would wager that if you are an existing brand that has a large audience, and I'm saying, let's say we've all bought likes on Facebook, so you may have 10 lakh people and 10 likes and 10 comments at best coming out there. I can't say that that's actually the tribe you needed to aggregate. But some of the ways in which we have done it, or at least try to do it, is tell the client, say, what is your guess of who's your customer who's already voted, maybe with their wallets? They have come to you by actually being consistently repeat buyers of your product. So there has to be some affinity there. People who actually converse with you, who take the trouble to come and tell you why you should get better. These are all the starting points of actually trying to build a tribe, right? So again, it comes back to the same thing. If you create a forum, if you aggregate these people there, and then you give them your intended desire, your shared purpose, let's say, which is a fundamental thing to remember. This has got nothing to do with you wanting to sell more. That is an end product. Your purpose and whatever, when you say when a brand has a purpose, it has a point of view about how life ought to be, and you're aggregating that audience out there, right? When you aggregate that, says you and I, you meaning the brand and the community members, are going to make that reality come true and keep this growing. The right set of people come towards you. If you're creating a content piece, usually brands create content pieces. I don't think it's schizophrenic. I don't think brands are creating content pieces or advertising being Machiavellian and trying to show the wrong face. I don't think that's true. I think where the gap really happens is all these content pieces that you're putting currently on, let's say, on your Instagram or your Facebook page, the mandate only seems to be that put the content pieces out there. Somebody is going to watch it, and therefore, job well done, right? But that is, if I were to tell a brand, I would tell them your content pieces only goal should be to provoke conversations. You want the other party to come and respond to you, and your job should be to sustain the conversations, because when you invest time, effort, and people into this, you will discover what your brand is. You will discover your tribe. And I use the word discover. You don't know exactly what it is. You have a broad trajectory, right? You'll invest more time and effort into actually meeting these people physically. You'll invest time and effort into conversations online with these people, and this will compound over time. This is the trajectory. Philosophically, this is the trajectory. Now, the odd content piece might fall flat on its face and people might get pissed, but even that is an opportunity to have a conversation with your tribe. It's like family, right? You won't hide everything. You see the good parts and the bad parts, but you're committed to each other. Now, that only comes through bloodlines, which all animals might exhibit. But human beings form friendships which have nothing to do with bloodlines. We form friendships based on interests, based on passions, based on belief systems. And a brand is also part of a belief system. Once you accept that, the stance you take can aggregate people. There will be high points. Like there would be a point in time where a Nike, when it advocates standing with Colin Kaepernick, would get brickbats and bouquets. And over time, people would have said that, okay, that's a seminal moment in brand formation. It allows you to do those things because you're interested in this dialogue. I think brands know that if I have a community backing me up, I can stand for what I believe. You look at, there are various brands that will do it, but I think this Q&A, I don't want to get hijacked just by this question. But I think fundamentally it's those things that you have a higher purpose and there is an audience that will come to it. You can start somewhere and the rest will keep coming to you. Your current audience will bring you the next that you have seen.
Yeah. Dilip, as you kind of organize the questions, I'll just allow Abhik, because he's raised his hands, to take the question himself. Abhik, you want to talk?
Yeah, can you, am I audible?
Yes, Abhik. Yeah, go ahead.
So, Navin, whatever you spoke about in the last 45 minutes, I get your point and I can relate to your thought process. If the brand is a small one, say, for example, you spoke about Joseph Roddick, if you're talking about a smaller brands which are, just coming into this kind of ecosystem, it is understandable. But I am not agreeing to the fact the brand which are already, getting into or being in the little bit in the matured stage, and large FMCG brands, say, for example, typically if I talk about Surf Excel, I mean, where there is not too much, I mean, as whatever Surf Excel will give, Ariel will also give the similar kind of whatever productivity. Say, for example, if I'm talking about Pepsi, Coke, and all the cola division, thumbs up. So my question to you is that today, I think what brands are really wanting to do, and going by the logic of Byron Sharp himself, where he speaks about that how brands grow. Okay, he talks about reach. He talks about new recruitments. he says that please don't care about your loyalists because there's nothing called loyalist. So if they have a better offer from your competition, they will not blink. They will move on to your competition, and that's how brands grow. It's only about reach. It's only about new recruitments. It's only about new customer acquisition, and that can be built only by broadcasting, on a bigger media. So I'm a little bit confused over here. In that case, I'm not building a community, right? If it's a smaller brand, if it is permissible to some extent, then perhaps it makes sense. Like for example, Nike still might make sense. But if I'm talking about any other FMCG bigger brands, I don't see a community building. It's only about the top of mind awareness which I have, and whether that brand belongs to my consideration set, and that converts. So it's about every time I'm changing to a new brand with the basis of offer, and I'm not too bothered about whether it's giving me that kind of productivity or not.
I mean, this is going to be a large philosophical discussion of it. And you're not the first person to mention this. I remember there was a meeting there, Rajesh and I were in a large, I'm not naming the name, but large Indian conglomerate. They'll have, clearly one of the biggest in India, and everybody in the organization were strong brand builders. They would have built businesses, etc. They also mentioned the same thing. This can be done by an individual, but not a large brand. In your case, you're also adding the layer, if I heard you right, saying maybe it's not necessary. Why do you need it? I don't even need to nurture my tribe. I just need to voice what I am offering to somebody else. And affinity, is not necessary to build. And I think this will only change, Avik, if these smaller brands become as large as the big ones. And they are on that trajectory is what I feel. I don't know if Jamit's on the call, but I'm sure in financial services, if a few years back you would have said that this rank outsider called Zerodha will come and kick the butts out of the big financial companies and take over the entire space of discount brokerage just by building community and just by teaching their community how to act, people would have laughed them out of their faces. When the small brands become big is when, and they become big because they built this affinity. And I can't argue the analogy you say is on Surf Excel. I'm sure if I am the brand manager sitting in Surf Excel, there has to be something to that brand that is of meaning beyond the brand, not the product. I'm saying that is of deeper meaning. There's a reason why they exist, and there is a tribe of people who have formed an affinity to that brand that exists in its usage, that exists in its choice, that exists in the world it believes it occupies. That is a form of identity formation for me, because I do choose it, not merely out of habit. I do choose it every time, because every act of choosing it again is to tell me I am this, I am not that. And I think it can exist in any category. There was an earlier thought that this can only happen in lifestyle categories where there is self-expression, etc. But the brands we actually choose versus the ones that are commodities, we actually choose. You see community building happening across categories. Categories in B2B, you can build communities where you're supposed to all be wearing your rational hats and then making choices that are devoid. I mean, it would have been the gold standard for Byron Shah. But even there, people make these decisions emotionally. And tribe formation is survival mechanism for human beings. It's been encoded genetically. And if brands stand for that, and I'm part of this, not that, it is clearly possible. I don't think it's not possible, but we will not settle this argument in dialogue like this. The only thing I think, like today, for example, I'm telling Rajesh that today we find it easier to go and tell that a human-centered business strategy can actually work because it rests on the back of the success. But I think multitudes of small brands will grow big. Once they become big, this would have been the journey they came through. And I think it's not the end of broadcast. I think they all will coexist in some shape or form. But the power is in tribe creation. What shape and form tribe creation will take will evolve, because we are still in early stages of understanding it, is my sense. But yes, I think we should continue this discussion offline rather than hijacking it. But I knew this question would come, and it's not very easy to settle it.
Thanks so much. I get you, but yeah, this has been always worrying for me. I mean, does say for example, does Amul really need to bother about peanut butter? To my mind, never.
But yes, I'm saying, what is Amul's tribe? If you really have to go and look into it, it would happen. Like I'm saying, a product like Maggie, through communication, understood that it's not about it's a means for creativity, actually, right? And whether you look at it as a creative campaign, it's not the product, it's the recipes that came. People started doing that when the brand was in trouble. But there is possibilities for tribe creation around the usage of the product, about the philosophy of the brand, about the people who chose it because they would be of a certain way. There are many vectors for building this, but they usually coalesce. You find that there is homogeneity in that tribe around certain vectors. There is. It has to.
Got it, Naveen.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. I've got my answer.
Dilip, you want to kind of take it?
Yeah, I think there is a question regarding the authenticity of communities. The question is this: a lot of brands are trying to build tribes and communities. As businesses, the idea is to attract people for your brand. And when companies take up the tribe narrative route, and when this becomes the normal communication mode, don't you think people will look through it? Because at the end of the day, business is about sales and profitability and all of that. This is just another brand communication mode. What are your views?
It's a very good question. I think, thank you for asking that question. I think one of the fundamental things to remember that when we create a community, we may have taken the initiative as brand creators to form the community, but the community doesn't belong to the brand. It belongs to those people. It is their community. And if you philosophically understand that, you will find yourself not doing typical marketing messaging. Everybody understands that these conversations eventually will help the brand and it will form businesses, etc. And even in the communities we form, a lot of people initially will be cynics, saying that, they look for that transactional relationship because for 100 years we've done this transactional relationship. But once they understand that you are investing in a social relationship, you care, the right kind of people stay on and this thing builds. Initially, it is met with a certain level of skepticism. So to any brand that wants to get into community building, we'll always say that don't think of it as an experiment. It is a commitment of you, your team, your people to build a tribe no matter what, because you believe it exists and you have to radiate that belief, and you'll find what is useful for that tribe and you'll keep doing those actions and it will keep increasing this tribe. But it's about them. It's not about you wanting the same. The moment you wear that hat, what am I getting out of this community? It is a recipe for exactly the kind of cynicism that the person who asked the question does. It is about them. It's their community.
Okay. There is another question which is related to what Ashish was just talking about. To your mind, what is the relationship between brand advocates and brand communities? And there is a question linked to it. Why consumers join communities? What is it in there for them? So taking the point by saying that if there is nothing like loyalists, then who are the people who join? I mean, what is the difference you make between advocates and communities, and why do they really join?
I'm not sure if I really understood that question. I understood the second part of why people would want to join communities. When I'm talking about brand advocates, is it about the influencer marketing world? Is that the narrative? Maybe they can clarify, because I don't want to answer the wrong question, but let me try and at least answer the second part of the question, which is, why do people join communities? Usually there is something of value to them. That's when a brand starts to explore its communities, it could be, we have even started communities where we've started the pitch by saying, we actually don't know our customers. This is a process of actually being interested in your lives. Will you be willing to share what it is? We'll tell you what you're working on, what we are trying to improve. Will you tell us a little bit more about ourselves? I am actually genuinely interested. And as cynical as we are led to believe that people don't, genuine people who are interested in the future of the brand and the goodness of the brand come up. And I'll give you like an anecdotal experience, but I'll tell you this. So one of the community managers in Center of Gravity is Navin Narayanan. She used to manage a community of about 2,000, loyalist customers of this brand called Unlimited. The relationship between the initial set of customers, the core members of that community group who really resonated with the belief was so strong that when one of those community members got married, she was invited to the wedding. Now, can you imagine what is the strength of forging such a deep set of relationships with your customers? This is possible. I mean, I can't really imagine strangers being called to your wedding by anybody, and that too a relationship with a brand that relationship might not have been as strong as you began it. And I think that exists. They are looking for a connection because they actually are fond of you. You already have a dormant tribe if you are a big brand. It has to exist. It can't just be that you won the battle of commoditization because your positioning was slightly better than the other guys. There is a deeper relationship that has to have formed with a certain set of customers. There may be people who are buying you as the best of the commodities, but a certain set of customers, and that could be large in many brands' case, would have it. I'll give you an example. We created 2 communities for this brand called Cafe Coffee Day, right? One of them was a barista community, another one was a customer community. We only had to start it and say, we want to make Cafe Coffee Day better. The sheer amount of conversation that came from customers is, this is, transformed my life and I want to interact with it. And I want to get this brand better. The people who are looking out for us, both, baristas and customers, was insane amount of conversation. We didn't have to do anything. We just formed the group and said we wanted to get better. The people came. They were invested. It had transformed their lives. They want to share their stories. This can happen if you are a commodity. It can happen, commodity, I'm saying it can happen if you're a B2B brand. It can happen if you are across categories. It can happen, it has happened in finance. We know that. The example exists in front of you. So they come for something that you deliver as value to them. It can be how to use the product that you bought better. That is how support communities were formed. Apple found support communities because they never invested in support. They had a rabid set of fans who were advocates of this brand when it had 2% market share. But Apple just endorsed that. And that's the support community. You ask each other and help each other out. That's a community. So I think there are many vectors by which you can assume that the people who have chose you, there exists a vector of forming communities that is already there. You have to discover that first. And then you'll add layers to it.
Yeah, maybe I'll take one more question. I think it's
sorry, we always have an after party, guys, because the questions are longer than the conversation, and we have not hit upon that sweet spot yet. But for those of us who are, staying on in the after party, please stay on and try and answer as many as possible.
I think this is a question as well as a statement from Sonal, who's saying genuine community building is expensive and time consuming. Businesses typically want ROI and Q-on-Q growths linked to money spends, making it difficult for companies to invest in it. And what do you feel about it? I mean,
it's one part of that equation. It's not the other. It is time consuming. It actually is not expensive. We are used to getting the ROI in terms of headcount and whatever needs to be done. The challenge in organizations is you have to put a team of people who have the agency, the freedom, and the authority to speak with the voice of the brand, and being able to converse with customers or whoever your intermediaries or whoever you're creating a tribe with freely, right? I'll give you an example of a brand that did it, and it was then $1 billion brand. I don't know how big it is. It's a brand in the US called Zappos. Now, Zappos is famous for having built, customer service as one of its core differentiators. But what is interesting is, I was at a book release for this book called Delivering Happiness, and the CEO of Zappos, Tony Hsieh, was going to give a speech, and he got invited. He went to the big book release ceremony. Now, the person who gave the speech was not Tony Hsieh. He just came and took some questions. The person who gave the talk was somebody who had joined Zappos 2 weeks ago. Okay, she was very young. She was about, she would have been about 21. It was her first job out of college. She had joined Zappos. They hire for culture, and the biggest induction that's given to people is understand what the brand is, what is the philosophy, what are you working towards, what is our purpose, what are we trying to create, and they reflect on this philosophy year on year, so it doesn't stay static. That's one component. So she knew in her own words, what her experience of Zappos was. So she's going to deliver what is the essence of this book. That's one. The second thing there is they look at customer service as marketing, right? So their call centers, people, they are judged by, they are rewarded for the longer calls with the customer. That is, the more you converse with the customer, you're building a relationship. You're not judged by how many calls you got through in 1 hour, which is the paradox of the BPO thinking, right? You handle so many calls, so you resolve so many problems. No, the longest call on record, I think, goes on for 10 hours. So that's a different story. But when they've done these two things, it is very clear. I can imagine that girl being able to manage a community for that brand. If you just need a set of few people who will do it, who have been given a budget, and they can force the community and not worry about it so much that is this going to be like an ad that if I get it wrong, my entire pyramid is going to fall down. That's usually the challenge of the broadcast mechanism thinking. I can't get it wrong. There is no such thing as right or wrong. You're continuously going to converse. Sometimes you're going to fall on your face and get egg on it. You'll still pick yourself up. Your community is going to pick yourself up. It takes effort. It doesn't take as much money as you think it does, but it has to be done internally by the people who want to do it. And the reason small companies do it early is because the founder and the people who started the company intuitively know what they're trying to build. They're not going to look around and say, am I saying the right thing or the wrong thing? No, they're just going to say it. It just comes freely. I think that's the mental block you have to get over.
Yeah. Anuja, I think Navin did address the question when Dilip kind of paraphrased what you're asking, but is there anything you want to add on in terms of what you feel may not have got covered? I just unmuted it.
Yes. Okay, I'm on. I'm unmuted.
Yeah.
Hi, Navin.
Hi.
Thanks for this session. While I understand, that deeper relationships and how empathetic we are towards the community members makes them feel that why do they need to be part of a community? Do you think that recruiting certain members to the community makes it a more of a controlled group versus an open platform?
No, I'm recruiting a certain members. So that's an interesting construct. We are getting into how of building communities a little bit here, but to get a sense of community when you're building a community, I'm just going to give you a philosophical answer, not the process of it. The first initial set of members who come are crucial. So keeping that group to really understand, discover, and to keep it going is critical because they set the tone for how the rest of the members who are going to come over time, the next set of members who join and participate. This is all going to be new for a brand that hasn't built community from scratch in its genesis years, especially for a brand that's trying to build a community. After it's actually got a large business and a customer base, we are trying to build a community. I'm answering in that context. That the initial set of members who understand how to engage the next set of community members, that when you open up, they don't emulate the people who created the community, they emulate the other members. So that's, if it's a community where deep conversations are happening, other guys know this is what needs to be done. You're choosing to look at an initial set of people by assuming that there must be a relationship. You have to have some proxy for doing it. The best proxy is, I think, if you can go to your customer complaints, that may be a very good place to start, but you will know that you're getting in to first repair the relationship. And repairing the relationship is an important act. So initially you will get brickbats and that's okay. But if you repair that relationship, you can start from there and then start and, build it in the long run. So different brands choose different spaces for doing this, but it's more to look at a small set to build the broad contours of the community, and then knowing when you open it up, if this is going to evolve. You're listening and then playing back. If they say, no, I need a lot more conversation in this group because I don't know what the devil I have bought, like especially in the case of financial services, many people buy products and then they're intimidated by the very choices they've made. So they'll just sit there quietly, right? Because every act of engaging with it is a reminder to you that you're a duffer for having made these choices and you want it to quietly go away. But if a brand allowed you to do that in a certain set of environment, or actually augmented your relationship with that, it can get built. So the initial set is only for building the core, and then you have to make it bigger, obviously. Otherwise, you'll have a small microcosm. You can create a micro community if that shared purpose is only meaningful to that community. Then it makes sense. Otherwise, you should have you should have a large community of your customers. You may have certain kinds of customers who you feel need to be nurtured differently. You can have sets of communities, but the idea is to build relationships.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Do we have time for more questions?
Maybe one or two.
Guys can chat and tell.
Yeah.
Okay, I think you answered it in some form, but this question from Varun, which asks, how do we manage communities where there are a large set of dissatisfied customers?
I think that's a very good place to actually start building community, Varun. You may decide how the shape and manner in which you want to address it, right? That's your call. Ideally, you should meet them individually and converse and do it, and how it has been addressed, and put that out. That shows commitment, that allows for customers to express dissatisfaction, knowing that you want to address it. That is in line with the values of your brand, right? You can't obfuscate dissatisfaction and get away, right? Because in today's day and age, if you're a brand and let's say a new set of customers are going to come and want to choose you in whichever category you operate, if the category is of a certain level of involvement, I'm going to look for whom? I'm going to look for other guys who walk this path before me. So that relationship will need to get mended. And if you have dissatisfied customers and you know who they are, mending that relationship is important investment to do, rather than walking away and inducting them to understand where the brand's expectations and the outcomes mismatch, so that the new future set of customers understand. You'll find what needs to get fixed, not only for that customer, so that this problem doesn't arise for others. I think it is worthwhile to do that. And I think any founder or any member would do that with the customers who are disgruntled, to understand if we have left everything out there, and then if they are still dissatisfied, you'll feel comfortable saying, I left it all out there. I think if you have dissatisfied customers, I don't think it's as big a problem as we imagine it. Every human being understands that some customers will be disgruntled. Every human being knows today that when I read 100 Amazon reviews, which ones are trolls and which ones are the genuine ones. We have an intuitive understanding of that. I wouldn't be so worried of having negative conversation in the community. What I would be worried about is having none. If there is apathy, that means that people are disengaged. That could not be my thing. Even negative engagement is good engagement.
Kanika, you want to kind of ask the question on differentiation? I just unmuted you. Hemant, I'll just come back to you now. Kanika, you want to ask the question?
Hello?
Hi.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to understand one thing. See, creating community is very, very critical. I understand that. But how do we differentiate? Because in the same space, let's say if I have to give you an example from retail, there are so many competitors who are operating in the same space on Instagram. So even the same, campaigns and the conversations get, aped. So it's very difficult to, remain differentiated and, keep those people, engaged with brand. What are your solutions for that?
See, I wouldn't worry. I don't know what the question on the competition is. Are we saying that this is a repertoire category where I think somebody is asking?
So I'll just give you an example. Let's say, I create a community on youth, let's say. So what we have noticed and over the period of, years, same conversation or same kind of, campaigns would say, let's say digital campaigns will be aided by our own competitors. So there is no differentiation on the platform. Let's say Instagram only, there is no differentiation. Same people will be loyalists to me as well and to the, competition as well. So what's the point of creating the community which is, just all over the brands?
So my question to you, because this is, it's about what do we believe is our uniqueness? Is the question. It's on our brand. Like, what is our stance will be my first question. Outside of the products we sell, if I'm a lifestyle brand, I'm assuming this is a lifestyle brand.
Yeah.
What is my stance that I'm taking that has got very little to do with my merchandise. I understand the merchandise, everybody, we know fashion follows a certain, if it is fashion, in fact, it follows a certain trajectory. It's not just in India, even on the ramp, if something is in vogue, I mean, I don't know what tiger prints and skulls are in vogue, they're going to show up across the spectrum. We know that. But the stance of the brand, when I disaggregate it from the merchandise you sell, if I put it on a flag and say, this is the country I have created, and this is my constitution, and this is the belief system of the brand, is that very clear to us? Do we want to create that? And that is usually a polarizing argument. I take you back to the argument of make America great again. They have a very strong enemy against which they stand, which is why that solidarity of that tribe is so strong. They are very conscious of what they have given up. I don't want the liberal elites. I don't want the posters. I don't want the marijuana gang. All that can go away. But my strength of this tribe is so strong, is going to carry me across the board. So if our brand is that strong, we will be able to create the tribe, irrespective of the fact that our merchandise may still be in the same zone, because everybody is going, if I don't know, I don't know what's in vogue, whatever is in vogue, you can find the same set of merchandise. I'm sure that there are brands that have taken stances, whether that's a Diesel or somebody else, will have a stronger tribe, because they've used community building principles and fostered that conversation. I think it's a mix of both, actually. It's your communication also has to radiate that, your behavior and your tribe also has to radiate that, and they usually come together. If that's broadly, and specifically to the analogy in your example, it's hard to debate right now, but usually there will be a uniqueness. If it's a strong brand, there has to be a uniqueness that's of value to somebody who's chosen that brand. The category may be a repertoire, but in my wardrobe, I will have 70% of that, and that only is loyalty. That's okay.
So, okay, thanks.
Ashish, you want to come on? Ashish Ray? I mean, Ashish was telling that how regiments in army are very successful in creating a tribe. They do a great job of it.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, I fully agree with what I have seen over the last some time in Navin's presentation. I think very brilliantly done. My sincere appreciation.
Thank you for saying that.
Gained out of that. I really think, yes, armies create tribes. Loyalty programs are attempts to create tribes. I've seen people wanting to fly Jet Airways only and not wanting to fly another. I mean, it's a form of a tribe. That
absolutely.
Whether it is defined or it is in the mind, etc., I don't know. I just had a question here. Is the advent of broadcast more Western and community more Eastern?
Oh, I never had that question. I've not really thought about that.
Because the Industrial Revolution also was a Western concept.
Sure.
And so when you link the two, that is how it occurs to me. And the roots of the Western civilization are in logic, reasoning, science, Aristotelian, and the roots of the Eastern are more in the Lao Tzu, Confucius, or the Indian philosophers. And community has always been a concept in India. And just a thought that occurred to me. It's not a question, it's a thought. And the question, maybe if that is right, the question is, what happens when they confluence?
I don't know. I'm actually a little, it's more thought-provoking. I never really thought of it that way. Rajesh, you had a view?
My feeling is that the idea of people wanting to engage, talk, converse, listen, bond, I think that's a universal thing. I'm sure the idea of this media industrial complex, that might have been triggered by the Western world clearly. But I feel like people sitting under, God knows where they sat under and discussing with Aristotle and Plato, I think pretty much followed the same principles of conversation and listening and so on. So I think that idea of people wanting to engage with each other is a very primordial human need, it's very universal. We know that brands like Starbucks, and Navin talked about Trump, and even Obama was a brilliant campaign creating communities. I'm sure even we not have the digital world at that point in time, but as intensely. But Ronald Reagan and his campaign also would have created powerful communities during that period. He was able to manage both the Democrats and the Republicans to come to him in some way.
I mean, if you go back to religion is a powerful community creator. There is a gospel, there is an ideology, and Jesus's first 12 apostles who traveled the rest of the world without worrying about what's going to happen to them, were believers in a community. It's the same thing. You have rituals, and you have practices, and you keep renewing the faith consistently, they use community building very powerfully. The principles are human, actually, in that sense.
What sustains the tribe? Is it rituals? Is it the purpose?
I think the purpose is very strong. Adhering to it, people need to see consistent examples of adhering to it, and also organically allowing for growth, allowing for I'm talking in the context of brands, right? Allowing for growth for new members to come in and influence the community, not be rigid. How well you induct new people into the space, make them feel welcome, allow them to find their own voice, and create a space where growth emotionally and physically can happen, and it will take its own shape and form, right? Powerful. If you think of "Make America Great Again" as a thought, or when Obama ran, especially in his first election campaign, they gave the philosophy and then said, have these discussions in your own neighborhoods. That is why the large speeches are still important, which is when the showstopper comes and makes arguments. Equally are important town halls, equally are important face-to-face conversations where the speaker is not even present, but people are debating the ideology. It's to own the issue and the belief system. And I think those things are, nurturing activities. But if I have to look at it, religion does a very good job of creating community, although in some ways I feel, that there is a control structure there. But by and large, many of the thought processes are into community building. They give outlets for people to find their own expressions through charity work and etc. And there are various ways of doing it. But it's a sense of belonging. It gives you a sense of identity. Just like you said, military, elite groups do it. The Marines do it by distinguishing themselves from the others. And at that point in time, especially when your identity is being formed, young people want to believe and become part of something bigger than themselves, and a community, whether you are young, old, etc. It strongly gives you a sense of identity. It exists in the brand context outside of the functional benefits of what the product that brand is making at that point in time does. Though the usage of that product is also conversation in the community, but that's not the be all and all.
Dilip, any other questions? I think that's one.
Yeah, I think we can stop here.
All right.
I mean, there are
guys, sorry for a late entry here, Gaurav speaking. I had one question which was kind of bugging me for some time.
Yes.
So Navin, I'm sorry I joined your webinar really late. So you could have covered that. So just pardon me if you have. And for my enlightenment, I'll go back and watch the webinar video once over. But I was just curious that several communities really don't stand up per se when brands make communities. It is not necessary that the brand be in the same service or in the same business. Are there several strong examples of that sort? Because see, what a brand can really live for or stand for can be much, it should be much bigger than what it is really hoping to sell for, right? And then from that point of view, what it hopes to deliver to a community of its followers, or I'm using followers in a slightly broader sense, not the social media ones that we typically look at, but right. You have people who follow the brand for a certain kind of maybe a value or an attribute. That's one set of it. But the other people typically look at it and say that this brand is more than what the product is, and then the communities tend to take a very different variety. Are there such kind of instances which would come to your mind?
And I don't know if they've really formed a community, and I don't know, Rajesh, if something strikes you, any of you guys want to chime in and say that. But let's say there are brands who are in spaces where you would have thought creating a tribe of people interested in it were difficult to do. And yet they did it by engaging in some dimensionality of their brand that they themselves found interesting. I'll give you an example. There's a container brand called Maersk. They are the guys who build that standard, the shipping containers, etc.
Yeah, they're the logistic guys, correct.
Logistic guys. But they looked at themselves not just as a shipping container guys, but the fact that their containers travel the world. So in their minds, they were brands who were witnessing all the things that are happening across the world. They started a content space that showed where their containers were. They were in Antarctica, in the deep ocean, what they saw. as what the container saw when it went elsewhere, right? Now, it doesn't mean that now I don't, and right now I don't know how much conversation they've had. At that point in time, they were showing a dimensionality to their brand and aggregating an audience. But I would assume there are a container brand can look at the journey of the container and have a conversation around its community. If I were building a community for a container brand, I know that is my customers at that point in time, their lives are in transit. I would be interested in building what is the idea of being in transit and change and look at that. I don't know what the higher purpose is, but I don't see it, frankly, Gaurav, as a deviation from yourself. Because if you're following where your audience wants to go and a bulk of your audience are of that kind, that is a natural space for your brand to exist. They are telling you we are interested in this. And I don't think that's deviant from that. I mean, there are micro examples of that I can, you can tell. Like, for example, we get a small community for Asian Paints that we run primarily for Insight. And during the age of Corona, the community manager plays games with the community members, right? One week she would have done Dam Sharaj, another week she would have done Let's Play Tambola, another week you would have done, I don't know what was the game, it doesn't come to mind now, but there was some other game. Oh, she arranged for a Zumba class and people danced on. Now, what does this have to do with Asian Paints? Everything that happens inside the home is of concern to Asian Paints because that's the philosophical stand that it takes. And in the times when people are stuck in their homes, I'm interested in whatever is going on in their homes. And I know that you and I are the same. We do this. And that's an activity that happens inside it. They're interested. We want to do it. We don't think beyond that saying, Abhi, say, kaisa kya bikega. That should not be in our heads, right? We have provided value at that point in time. That would be the logic by which I would approach that, to create a sense of community.
That's an interesting perspective. I mean, I actually didn't look at it from that when I posed the question, to be very honest. But yeah, that's very interesting. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
I think also
There's
sorry, Dilip.
Go ahead, Rajesh.
I think one way in which you can organize a community is by looking to the purpose of the brand, because the purpose, a common shared purpose, is a good way to feel strongly about the brand that you engage with or buy. And very often purpose goes outside, it builds on, but it clearly goes far larger than the scope of the product category. So if you take, let's say, like we were mentioning in the last webinar, if you're talking about luggage, you build, sorry, we just had a power breakdown, but anyway.
Rajesh and I live in the same complex, so we both have gone dark. So you're hearing the voice of Darth Vader kind of thing. Sorry, go on, Rajesh. Yeah.
So if you build if you're in a brand in the luggage category, you build a community around the idea of travel, something around the purpose of travel, right? So that while it draws from the luggage category, the condition is far larger than that, and people relate to travel as a story. In the case of Asian Paints, we do the conditions around home and not necessarily around paints. So clearly you can move the discussions to way beyond the category. In fact, if anything, you should do it way beyond the category in many cases. Yeah. Sorry, Dilip?
I was reminded of the Michelin star story.
Oh, yeah.
Even before, the communities became big. This was happened many years back. For the truck drivers, the major part of the conversation was where do they eat? Where do they eat good quality food? And that's how the Michelin, the tire companies started rating restaurants on the way. And that was a big part of the conversation. And eventually, it became Michelin stars and it went on to become something else. But it started off as the interest of the group. So one way to have community is rooted in your purpose. The other way is to really look at what is the interest the group has, your core customer group has, and pick up that conversation. It becomes far more authentic.
Absolutely.
And that's a very powerful idea, actually. I mean, Michelin stars completely missed out. Yes, that's a that's a very powerful idea. Thanks a lot, Dilip.
Welcome.
Yeah. Sarika just mentioned that, just to add to Kanika's question, I feel it's more about talking about communities as differentiated from the typical FB Insta pages. I think we talked about that, no?
Yeah.
The typical FB Insta pages. And I think that's a disservice to community because you can purchase all the likes and the PPs and price please and whatever it is, but it doesn't work. In fact, it does a disservice to your brand and in fact may even screw it up a little bit more.
Yeah. And that's the kind of thing that will get caught. If we do that, then neither would you have built community and you will have actually increased the cynicism on the other end.
Yeah.
People see through that.
You remember, Navin, I met with Joshua Karthik as part of some work we're doing for a digital strategy for, again, the last brand that Navin was referring to. And he asked us, can you show me the Insta page of the brand? And then he started to scroll through it. And then he burst out laughing, saying that this is all bot, man. This just doesn't matter. It's a bluff. And I think the world of the extension of this media industrial complex also means that if you show the numbers, you're happy. And the numbers with the likes is even more happy. And then that's all there is to it, actually. So that I think that would be the opposite of what you should do to communities, actually, FB and Insta. Yeah, I think we should close.
I think we should close it. Yeah.
Thank you all for your patience and listening, and hopefully it was interesting and entertaining. Join us again next week. We'll have a new series of, we'll try and do one of these every week, and maybe we'll try and innovate. Maybe we'll have a couple of us in a different format that we try this out. But thank you very much for being part of our little tribe, and you had the hard work of listening, and thank you for the questions. That's really hard. Thank you all. Have a good night. Stay safe out there.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.